Today's sponsor is Advancement Courses. Stay tuned at the end of the show for a special coupon for 20% off any of their grad level professional development courses. Game-based learning in action with Matt Farber, episode 268.
The 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with Vicki Davis. Every weekday, you'll learn powerful, practical ways to be a more remarkable teacher today.
Today we're talking with Dr. Matthew Farber, author of Game-Based Learning in Action, How an Expert Affinity Group Teaches with Games. Now, Matt, in this book, you talk about the tribe. Who is the tribe?
Well, the tribe is an affinity group, which is an affinity group is by definition people that come together because they have an affinity or a like something. And that can be game-based learning, but it could be Shakespeare, it could be raising chickens, it could be being Catholic. And some of those examples are from James Paul G., the professor who coined the term affinity groups and affinity spaces and was kind enough to write my foreword. And we see this a lot. Your listeners are likely in an affinity group, right? They come together because of some shared like-mindedness. We come together in these little tribes.
This tribe that you're talking about, they're teachers who like to teach with games, right?
Yes, there are teachers who like to teach with games. Many of them are big in other communities as well, such as ISTE.
When you say teaching with games, there's lots of terminology out there. There's gamification, there's game-based learning, there's all kind of. So how would you classify the way that they teach with these games, and what kind of games?
That is an excellent question. Thanks for asking that. This work stems from my dissertation research, which was an ethnography. I went into 3 classrooms, Steve Isaacs, Peggy Sheehy, and Paul DeVarsy, to observe them teach with games, and they all do it differently. In the book, I was able to expand the umbrella to bring in more teachers in the network, including myself, when I was in a K-12 classroom. Now I'm in a university setting. Gamification, those are those structures around games. Sometimes we hear groups, best, I would say, by Michael Matera, right, about turning the classroom into a game. Game-based learning is a little bit different than that, although Michael Matera does use games a lot, right? It pertains to using digital games and non-digital games as spaces for experience. And the teachers in this book really refer to games not as games, but more as virtual field trips or digital field trips, where their students would experience something, and then they would be able to take that context and use it in a learning environment. So if you're playing a game like Mission US, which is an educational game, there's a series of them, one set in the Revolutionary War. Students play it, they make these decisions, and then everybody has this shared experience with which to draw from to make the connections from content to. That's a little bit different from gamification. These teachers use some version of gamification, but they always use games in the classroom.
What is one of the exemplars that you like to point to where you say, okay, this is excellent teaching using games?
Well, there are a whole lot, right? So it goes from a digital game like World of Warcraft in Peggy Sheehy's class, which he uses to teach The Hobbit and the hero's journey, to making games like in Steve Isaacs' class, to Paul DeVarsy's class. He uses this game called Gone Home, which is this interactive house exploration game. A favorite of mine lately is one that John Fallon's used, and he describes it in the book, called Her Story. And there's no fast graphics or action. Basically, you go through hours, or it doesn't take that long to play, but it seems like hours of footage from a murder suspect. And you have to figure out, using search terms in a search engine, whether or not she's a reliable narrator or not. And it's an amazing experience because he uses it alongside books. So he's got Edgar Allan Poe, Cask of the Amontillado, right? Using whether or not that has a reliable narrator or not, and how that looks then in a video game. So that's one example. And what these teachers are doing is they're using games not as like game shows, not as taking like a TV game show like Jeopardy, or not like Kahoot, using it as that type of game. Not that there's anything wrong with doing that, but what they're doing is they're using a game the way you would use a book or a film. And this actually is a lot different than that mantra of educational technology just being a tool for learning. You really wouldn't say that. Like if you're putting on a Ken Burns documentary on the Civil War, it's a documentary, right? And using digital games and sometimes non-digital games the same way. Another easy way to wrap your mind around this is this game called Werewolf, which you can play with even a deck of cards. It's a summer camp game called Mafia. And you close your eyes and you have to guess who's like tapping on your shoulder. And I've used this in the classroom to teach about the Salem witch trials, where you don't know who's telling the truth. How does it feel to be in a witch hunt? So you do this as like this shared experience field trip for the class. And it goes through this cycle basically of play game, right? Then debrief and reflect. And these teachers don't use dashboards per se that come with video games or educational games. They use Google Classroom, Schoology. You make your own reflection. And then students get a chance to make. So maybe they're making a game in Scratch, or maybe in Minecraft, or maybe they're making a podcast or an iMovie.
So what is the result of this in engagement and learning?
Well, these are what we call gameful classrooms. So they do two things. They apply directly self-determination theory, which means that students in the classroom have a feeling of competence, so they feel like they're able to do what they're supposed to do and get their zone of proximal development. They have a feeling of agency or autonomy. They're in control of the learning experience, and they have a feeling of belongingness with other students, relatedness. And the other piece is called gameful learning, which is different than gamification. And it's very much like if your listeners have read Lifelong Kindergarten, the new book by Mitch Resnick, where students are invited to play. So we've got three things here. One is called identity play, where students take on new identities and the teacher takes on new identity. Like Steve Isaacs isn't a teacher. He becomes head of a game design studio and the students are making games. Illusory attitudes. And this means that you buy into the constraints of the game. It's almost like a suspension of disbelief when you watch a play. You believe that you're watching, action. You're not watching a bunch of people standing on a stage. And this idea of not knowing what's going to happen, it's ignorance is what the literature is called. And this is from Holden et al. This is their research, and it's in my book too. You don't know what's going to happen. These aren't didactic games. You're not playing a game. You can look at Minecraft. Who knows what's going to happen, right? And teachers are gameful too. So the teachers take on new roles. The teachers aren't afraid to fail, and the teachers don't know what the outcomes are, and they design these assessments based on reflections. So they're always constantly assessing. Genius Hour is a terrific example of gameful learning, where students get 20% time to design a project based on what they want to do, and they're taking on these real-world identities, and they are able to understand how things work, and they're not afraid to fail.
Well, gameful learning is a challenge for us to learn how to do. I know the more I integrate games, simulations, activities, the more excited kids get about learning. And the book is Game-Based Learning in Action, How an Expert Affinity Group Teaches with Games. Dr. Matthew Farber is the author, and he has lots of fantastic books. I've been using your books for years, Matt, to understand how to be a better teacher using games. So we've just hit the very tip of the iceberg. But I love the point he made about playing the game, debriefing, reflecting, and then creating. So some people pretend like the game is all there is, but the game sometimes is just the beginning of the full experience, and it can be so engaging for kids. So thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Perfect.
Need some great professional development? Today's sponsor, Advancement Courses, has more than 200 graduate-level online professional development courses for K-12 teachers. You can take these courses for continuing education, salary advancement, or recertification. And these courses have us teachers developing tangible resources to use in our classrooms immediately. Go now to advancementcourses.com/coolcat and use the code COOL20 at checkout to get 20% off any course. With this coupon, a 3 grad credit course is only $359. So Go to advancementcourses.com/coolcat to learn more and use the coupon code COOL20. Never stop learning.
Thank you for listening to the 10-Minute Teacher Podcast. You can download the show notes and see the archive at coolcatteacher.com/podcast. Never stop learning.